Hello, my name is Bob Bielinski and I'm the president of the Village of Wilmette. Thank you for taking time to learn more about your village. Now, I've given this State of the Village presentation a number of times over the past few months to a variety of groups in the community. But to broaden the distribution, we're recording the presentation and my comments so that more residents and business owners can get the benefit of the information in the presentation. To set the stage for our conversation about the state of the village, I think it's helpful to talk about why we decided to move to Wilmette and why we continue to live in Wilmette. And I was addressing a group of students and parents at the League of Women Voters Student Government Program kickoff meeting. And I asked the parents, I said, why did you move to Wilmette? And I got the same answers from them that I get all the time from residents. Generally, schools are at the top of the list. Our parks and recreation facilities are important, our nearness to Chicago, and just, we live in a very high quality community. It's a safe community. We have beautiful neighborhoods. These are all the reasons that people decide to live in Wilmette. What's happening in Wilmette? Well, hopefully all of you have had a chance to check out the new businesses in downtown Wilmette. We have a level of activity in the Village Center that we've really never experienced ever. In 2013, 4 new restaurants opened, and earlier this year, one of those restaurants was replaced with the Valley Lodge Tavern. They've been doing a great job since they've opened. So I hope if you haven't gone downtown that you do go downtown. We've also had new businesses open in our other business districts, and we had a very exciting ribbon cutting in May this year when our first hotel opened on the west side of Wilmette. It's a Marriott Residence Inn. It's a beautiful facility, and if you haven't been there yet, I really encourage you to go and check it out because it's really something that all of us can be proud of. The Baha'i House of Worship is finishing up work on its new visitor center, and we're just thrilled that they've decided to make that investment. And then the Elmwood Dunes restoration continues. The Wilmette Harbor Rotary Club recently made a $25,000 donation towards the Elmwood Dunes restoration. The Harbor Rotary Club was celebrating its 25th anniversary with this $25,000 grant. And I think the Elmwood Dunes is really going to become a treasure that all residents can enjoy. Now, the residents and businesses of Wilmette are served by a number of different local units of government. And each of those units of local government have their own taxing authority, they have their own governing body, and they have their own missions. And those bodies include our library district, the park district. We are served by 3 different school districts, the elementary school districts, District 37 and District 39, and then New Trier High School is District 203. And I'm going to talk about the village and how it provides services to its residents. So how are these units of local government funded? Primarily from your property taxes. And if you look at this chart here, you can see that the Village of Wilmette's share of your property tax is about 11%. The school districts are the vast majority of your property tax bill, and that's because property taxes are their primary method of funding. Now, what do you get for your 11%? Well, I like to think of the village as a service organization. The village exists. Its primary mission is to provide those critical municipal services that our residents and our businesses rely upon every day. What are those services? Police and fire protection, water and sewer, streets, alleys, and sidewalks. And hopefully many of you noticed the great job that our public works team has done with snow and ice control. This past winter was a very tough winter, and I can't tell you how many times I had a resident or a business owner come up to me and say, gosh, they're really doing a great job. I just came from a neighboring community, and I could tell when we got to Wilmette because the streets were in so much better shape. We collect the garbage, and in the fall we collect the leaves. Now, we're going to talk a lot about finances in this presentation. So to set the stage, I want to talk about the 3 funds which pay for village government. You have the general fund, you have the sewer fund, and you have the water fund. Now I'm going to talk about the sewer fund first. The sewer fund is very easy. The village collects a sewer fee from its residents. It's based on water consumption. That revenue is used to pay for sewer maintenance. It's used to pay for sewer repairs and improvements. If we borrowed money by issuing bonds, then those sewer fees pay back the bonds. Very simple. Sewer fee pays for sewers. The water fund is a little more complicated in that not only does Wilmette sell water to its residents, but it also sells water to wholesale customers, and the Village of Glenview is the largest of those customers. So we collect water revenue, and that revenue is used to pay for our water plant. Most of you probably know that there is a water plant. It's just north of Gilson Park on the lake, and we use that revenue to pay for the water distribution system. Again, if we borrow money by issuing bonds to pay for improvements, the water revenue repays those bonds. Now, importantly, from our wholesale water sales, there's some excess margin. And in 2014, the water fund will make a $1.2 million transfer to the general fund. And that transfer keeps other taxes, including property taxes, lower. So it subsidizes the general operation of local government. And the general fund basically pays for everything else that the village does. And I'm going to talk a lot more about the general fund in this presentation. So where does the village get its money to pay for these functions of government? Well, primarily the property tax. Property tax is 37% of general fund revenue. It would be $12 million in 2014. Next is the sales tax. That's about 12% of our general fund budget. Then we have permits and licenses. Those are building permits and your vehicle licenses. There are a handful of utility taxes. And then there's the income tax. Now the income tax, the Village of Wilmette does not levy its own income tax. Rather, that's our share of the state income tax. The state remits a portion of the income tax that it collects to municipalities based on their population. Refuse charges, also very simple. We outsource garbage collection in the village, and we basically pass along that cost directly to our residents. I talked about the water fund transfer on the prior slide. And then the real estate transfer tax. If you recall, when you purchased your home, you had to go to Village Hall before closing to buy your stamps. That's the real estate transfer tax, and it's an important source of revenue for the village. Where does that money go? Well, 80% of it goes to what I like to call the big three: police, fire, public works, and engineering. Those are the most basic services that village government provides. If you look at the more administrative functions of community development, finance, and administration, it's a much smaller portion of the overall budget. And what do we really spend the money on? People. We're a service organization, and it takes people to deliver that service. So 74% of our general fund budget is dedicated to personnel-related expenses. We also make use of outsourcing. 16% of our budget relates to outsourcing. For example, I mentioned garbage collection. We also outsource snow plowing for cul-de-sacs in the village during the winter. We outsource animal control. Certain of our building inspection capabilities are on an outsourced basis as well. We also make use of technology. Some of you may have used our online system this year to purchase your vehicle sticker. First year we've had that. We expect to continue to increase our use of technology to make us more efficient and cost effective. But at the end of the day, we are a service organization, and a computer cannot drive an ambulance. A computer cannot respond to a 911 call for help. And a computer cannot drive a snowplow during a winter storm. Now, in 2008, the village experienced a significant decline in revenue. It began near the end of the year. And in reaction, the village tightened its belt. And since 2008, there have been a number of cost-saving moves that have been made by the village. But as I mentioned on the prior slide, 74% of our expenses are personnel-related. So to have a meaningful impact on your expenses, you have to impact staffing and personnel. And since that date, over 13 employee positions have been eliminated. There have been a number of organizational restructurings that have taken place in each of the departments, and we've tried to make ourselves as efficient as possible. When someone retires nowadays, the immediate thought isn't, well, who are we going to hire? It's, can we reorganize our operations so that we can do this in a less expensive way, in a more efficient way. We've also, there are a number of areas here on the right where we've tried to become more efficient. I'm not going to mention all of these items here, but I do want to highlight one that's going to come back later in the presentation, and that's deferral of capital. If you look at this chart, it shows our staffing history, and you can see the decline in the number of full-time benefit eligible employees at the village. And currently we're operating at levels that are very close to 20-year lows in terms of full-time benefit eligible employees that work for the village. This slide is a complicated slide, and I'm going to take a minute to orient you to it. So this slide shows our general fund operating expenses. Along the horizontal axis here, you have years, and the vertical axis shows millions of dollars. And each of these bars represents the amount of general fund expenditures for a given year. Now we've broken it down into three categories. We've got operating costs, we've got public safety pensions, and then we have capital spending. So this green bar here, that's operating costs. The yellowish green are the public safety pensions, and then the blue bar on top, the blue portion of the bar on top, is capital spending. So if you look at this chart, you can actually see the impact of the organizational restructurings and cost cutting that took place in 2009. You can see the drop in the spending here. And then you can see that the growth in the operating costs was actually fairly small. And that, again, is the benefit of those operational reorganizations and dropping headcount. If you look at the public safety pensions, you can see that this portion of the bar grows over time. And on average, the pension growth has been approximately 12% per year, whereas our operating costs have only grown at 3% per year. On the top of each bar is the capital spending portion of the bar in the blue. And we're going to talk more about capital later, but I do want to just highlight for you, you can see that the blue bar portion here has really shrunk post the Great Recession. Now, when we talk about pensions, the first thing that you need to understand is that the village board does not set the amount of the pension benefit for the village employees. Those decisions are made by lawmakers in Springfield. And so we're somewhat limited at the village level on what we can do with regards to pensions. Our village employees are covered by three pension funds. The Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, which is a pooled fund for all the municipalities in Illinois. And then we have two separate Wilmette specific funds, the Wilmette Police Fund and the Wilmette Fire Pension Fund. And the police fund is the recipients are solely former Wilmette police officers, and likewise the fire pension fund, the recipients are solely former Wilmette firefighters. In 1996, the total expense for all three funds was just over $1 million. And if you fast forward to 2014, our budget is $5.4 million. Now, you may recall that our total general fund budget was $32.7 million. So $5.4 million is 16% of our operating expenditures on pensions. It's rather significant. Now, if you look at the components of our pension contribution, you can see that the powder blue bar here, the Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund contribution, has steadily increased. But the real increase has come from the dark blue bar and the red bar, which represent the police and fire pension payments. And you can see how they've increased over time. There's been quite a bit of news coverage as of late on the state's pension crisis. You've heard about the city of Chicago's pension crisis. And you're starting to hear a little bit about the public safety pension crisis at the municipalities. And this chart shows you the numbers that are behind that discussion. So how do we compare to our neighbors? Well, there are a lot of numbers on this chart, and I'm not going to go through all of them. but let me highlight a few points. First, when it comes to reserves. So we have a $5 million reserve. It hasn't been the village's policy to collect excess taxes from its residents so that we can build up a big pile of money. And so if you look at our reserves, both on a dollars basis and as a percent of general fund expenditures, we're managed very tightly with regards to reserves. We just talked about public safety pension funding and how important it is right now. How do we stack up relative to our neighbors? We're pretty much right in the middle. That 65% number that's there, that's a 2012 number. That number has increased to 68% at the end of 2013. Many of you probably are aware 2013 was a very good year for the stock market, and our pension funds reaped the benefit of that. But if you look at the other communities, you can see that Evanston has fallen behind in its funding. Glenview and Northbrook are ahead, but each of them made an extraordinary contribution to their pension fund. Glenview used funds from the redevelopment of the Naval Air Station into the Glen. Some monies from that went into the pension fund. And Northbrook issued pension obligation bonds. And pension obligation bonds are when you borrow money to put it into your pension fund. And you hope that your investment returns and your pension fund will exceed your cost of borrowing. That strategy can work very well when stock markets are strong. If the stock markets experience a loss, the loss is exacerbated in the pension fund, so it doesn't work well at all. Now, bottom line, property taxes, if you look, you can see that Glencoe and Winnetka and Wilmette tend to have a little higher property tax rate. These are bedroom communities. We don't have the type of commercial and industrial bases inside of our village. The village of Glenview has a range of property tax rates. They make significant use of special tax districts, and these special service taxing districts add to your property tax. So depending on where you live in Glenview depends on what your property tax rate is. Now, the villages of Northbrook and Skokie have dramatically lower property taxes than the others, and that's because of their significant retail sales tax, which come from the two malls, from Northbrook Court and from Old Orchard. In Skokie, sales tax are about 40% of general fund revenues, and in Northbrook that number is 34%. In Wilmette, sales tax is about 12% of our general fund revenues. So when I look at this slide overall, I think the numbers on this slide support the notion that Wilmette is a very fiscally well-run village. So as we look forward, what are the challenges that we face? Well, there's really two things. You've got stagnating revenues, and you have deferred capital needs that have really built up over time. With the revenues in the general fund, there is one revenue source that the village board controls completely, and that's the property tax. The village board has generally adopted a policy of modest increases to the property tax each year. There are some exception years where there have been some spikes, and those generally relate to either capital costs or pension contributions, or in the case of 2006, it's actually related to the emerald ash borer. You can also see, though, that in recent years, the village board has adopted a policy of trying to make the annual increase lower every year. Now, this chart is very important. Our non-property tax revenues are much more economically sensitive. And in 2007, our major non-property tax revenues totaled about $12.4 million. In our 2014 budget, that number is $11.6 million. So we still haven't caught up in 7 years to where revenues were before the Great Recession. Now, the important thing here is the revenue that was uncollected during those past 7 years, because eventually this number will tick back up and we will pass where we were in 2007. But if you assume just 2% sort of inflationary growth, this line right here represents where those non-property tax revenues would have grown. And this gray line represents where they actually were in each of the years. So this orange area is revenue that was never collected by the village as a result of the recession. And even if revenue returns, and it will eventually return to the 2007 levels, that revenue is gone. It will not be collected, and as a result, could not be used by the village for things like capital improvements. I'm going to come back to this $15 million number later in the presentation. Now here's our history of our capital spending, and we've broken it down into the three funds: the general fund, the water fund, and the sewer fund. And you can see that prior to 2010, the general fund averaged about $6 million a year in capital spending. 80% of that was financed with bond issues. Now, bond issues are great because you don't have to raise the revenue immediately. You can borrow the money to make your capital improvements, but you have to pay that back. And debt service in 2002 was about $1.5 million. In 2014, our budget in the general fund for debt service is $3.3 million. So there's been a significant increase there. Now you can see after the recession hits, you can see that the green bar is much lower. Subsequent to 2009, we averaged only $1.8 million of capital spending in the general fund. If you look at the other funds, you can see the water fund spending. There was a spike here in 2002. That related to the expansion of the water plant to accommodate the Glen, and the Village of Glenview paid for that cost. And then the dark blue bars are the sewer fund spending, and you can see consistent spending over the years with a rather significant spike right here in 2014. And the reason for that spike is the sewer improvement program that was approved last year by the Village Board. The Village Board approved $26.1 million. This spending is focused on the west side of the village, the part of the village that's served by our separate sewer system, and it's focused primarily on the sanitary side of the system. You know, for anybody who's ever had their basement back up, they know that there's absolutely nothing worse than having your basement back up in a storm event. So the goal of this spending is to reduce the severity and the frequency of basement backups in certain neighborhoods on the west side of the village. Now there's also been allocated $265,000 for a storm sewer study. We've experienced overland flooding in certain neighborhoods over the past several years, and the purpose of this money is to try to identify what improvements could be made on a cost-effective basis to alleviate some of those issues. Now, no discussion of capital funding would be complete without some pictures, and unfortunately these pictures aren't as rare as they used to be. You don't have to drive very far without seeing a street that's in need of repair, or a sidewalk, or an alley. So unfortunately this is not as rare as it used to be. When we talk about the condition of our streets, this chart is very helpful. It's the engineering department's absolute favorite chart, and it's complicated, so it's going to take me a minute to explain it to you. This purple line here represents the current average condition of our streets, and they're rated at a 72 rating, and that falls in the good category. Our long-term goal is to keep them rated at least at a 70, and that's above average condition for our streets. Now, these individual bars tell us what the rating of our streets will be at various levels of capital spending. This is the rating of the street projected for 2024, so 10 years from now. So what this says is to have our streets be at a target level of 70, a target rating of 70, we need to spend $1.5 million per year, every year, resurfacing the streets. Our 2014 budget for resurfacing is only $848,000. I mean, that's been the history of the village. The dedicated revenues that we've identified for streets have never been quite sufficient, and as a result, what typically would happen is the village would catch up. They would issue bonds and they'd do some catch-up work on streets. But the bottom line here, really, very simply, if we want well-maintained streets, we need to pay for their maintenance. So if you look forward a couple of years across the board, what are our capital needs? Well, they total $16.9 million. And these are not extravagant items that are up on this board. There's certainly some catch-up here, and as well as some annual ongoing expense. But we're talking about streets, and we're talking about alleys, and we're talking about sidewalks. And when we talk about critical building repairs, we're not talking about remodeling. We're talking about roofs. We're talking about ambulances, and we're talking about police cars. So these are the basics. These are the absolute sort of basic municipal services that we provide. And our needs over the next few years, $16.9 million. I'm going to harken back to that $15 million number on a few slides earlier, which represent the revenues that were uncollected during the recession and the slow economic recovery. It's not a coincidence that these numbers are close. So as we look forward, we're in a state of operational equilibrium. We expect revenues will rise at about 3% a year, and we expect operating expenses to rise at about 3% a year. Given the state's regulatory environment and our collective bargaining agreements, it's difficult to manage it much tighter than 3% per year. In the years past the downturn of 2009, we did manage expenses tighter than 3% per year, but that was really the result of the organizational restructurings that took place, and we've reaped the benefits of those at this point in time. So we're in this equilibrium where revenues are pretty well matched to expenses, but there's very little left over for capital spending. And what are the opportunities as we look forward? Well, we certainly have an improving economy, and we've seen sales tax and income tax rise this year. We've seen the real estate transfer tax bounce back quite nicely as the market's recovered and people are selling homes and moving to Wilmette again. Economic development is helpful. The new hotel is generating revenue now, increasing the size of the property tax base. When a development occurs at 611 Green Bay Road, that's also going to help, and the village board is currently reviewing a number of new proposals for that spot in the village center. Pension reform, some recent court decisions have not been helpful on this front, but the issue is so significant for the state and the city and for the municipalities that something has to happen at some point in time. If we look out a little bit further to 2018 and beyond, we have the potential for new wholesale water customers, which would generate some excess margin that could be used for things like capital spending. We recently signed Glenview up to another 30 years, and that's important, not only because we secured our main customer, but also because we've added a new customer. The North Main Utilities, beginning in 2020, will buy their water from Wilmette. So that's very exciting. It's good for our finances. We're also talking to a couple other municipalities who potentially could become customers. And then new revenues. The Village Finance Committee has been evaluating new revenues and exploring options. And the village board as a whole, in our budget meetings this year, will be looking at potential new revenues. What are the challenges that we face? Well, absent pension reform, pension costs are going to continue to go up. Recently, the Cook County assessor has been very generous with equalized assessed valuation changes, and as a result, our property tax collections have gone down. In Springfield each year, when lawmakers get together and try to figure out how to solve the state's budget problems, inevitably a discussion comes towards the revenues that they share with the municipalities. And if we lose revenue from the state, we really have just three choices. It's either replace the revenue, reduce expenses, which at this point in time would really be a decrease to service to residents, or defer capital funding. And that's really the issue that we have today, that the village has quite appropriately limited its capital spending during the recession and the slow recovery. But now we're at a point where those bills are very big, the needs are very large, and so any discussion of new revenue, in my mind, is directly connected to the capital needs. Thank you again for taking the time to listen to this presentation. I hope you found it informative and interesting. The real goal of this was to provide to residents and business owners the context within which the village board will be making decisions this year. So if you have questions, I would encourage you to contact the village manager's office. You can contact me, or you can contact any of the members of the village board, and we'd be happy to talk further with you about any of the items that we discussed. Thank you again.